Imagine a sickness, but not one you can test for with a swab or see under a microscope. It's a sickness of belief, one that doesn't announce its arrival with a cough or a fever, but with a quiet shift in the political air, a creeping sense that the world you knew is being replaced by a copy, an imitation that looks the same but feels profoundly wrong. This isn't the opening scene of a forgotten thriller. This is the political reality of 2025. The vital signs of global democracy are flatlining, with historic lows being recorded across the board. A staggering portion of humanity, well over a third of us, now breathes the air of authoritarian rule. We see the symptoms flare up in places like Hungary, where a leader like Viktor Orban pushes to muzzle or control any voice not singing from the state's hymn sheet. Foreign-funded media, NGOs, with laws that feel like echoes of Russia's playbook for controlling foreign agents. And this isn't an isolated case. It's a pattern, a global chorus of populist leaders singing a siren song to those who feel adrift, left behind by the relentless tides of globalization and cultural change. But here's where the story gets complicated, and where we often get the diagnosis wrong. The temptation is to simply dust off the old labels, to shout, "fascism," and call it a day. But as a thinker like Slavoj Žižek points out, that's like trying to understand a new disease by only looking at the symptoms of an old one. He urges us to look deeper, not just at the political theater, but at the shared, unspoken script that both the populist insurgents and, strangely enough, the liberal elites are secretly reading from. What are the ideological fantasies, as he calls them, that make the strongman's promise so seductive? As democracy quietly retreats, the real task isn't just to fight the obvious enemy. It's to understand the part of ourselves that finds the authoritarian solution strangely appealing. To examine why, in this moment, the illusion of order feels more sacred than the messy, difficult work of being free. Because the fever won't break until we understand what's causing it. When you think of an authoritarian leader, what image comes to mind? For most of us, it's probably a figure straight out of central casting, stern, disciplined, in a crisp uniform, delivering grand speeches from a balcony to a sea of adoring faces. Someone who demands absolute seriousness and dignity. But what if that whole image is a relic of the past? What if the new, and perhaps more effective, face of power looks less like a stoic general and more like a stand-up comedian? And it's here that a thinker like Slavoj Žižek would probably tell us to pause. He'd warn against the trap, the one so many people fall into, of just screaming fascism at every new populist leader that pops up. It's not that they aren't dangerous, but that the nature of their danger is different. These new strongmen aren't obsessed with maintaining their own dignity. In fact, they seem to thrive on publicly destroying it. It's a strange paradox. Power gets stronger and stronger, but at the same time, it becomes totally undignified, almost like it's making fun of itself. Think about it in a real-world sense with someone like Donald Trump, who Žižek once called the ultimate postmodern president. His authority didn't come from gravitas or a deep respect for the office. It came from pure spectacle. A serious policy debate or a damaging controversy would emerge, and instead of a carefully crafted, dignified response, you'd get a crude joke, an insulting nickname, or a bizarre tweet. And just like that, the entire crisis was reframed. What should have been alarming for his supporters just became another amusing episode. It's a genius, if terrifying, political move. It's like recasting your greatest liabilities as laughing matters, and suddenly, the people who should be holding you accountable are just part of the audience, entertained by the show. It's almost like we're watching a political version of the Joker from The Dark Knight. Remember his goal? It wasn't really about money or traditional power. It was about chaos, about proving that the serious people and their rules were a joke. In this new style of leadership, the joke isn't just a distraction. It's a weapon. It shatters the old rules of decorum and leaves opponents confused, because how do you seriously debate someone who refuses to be serious? So this is the wave of the future that Žižek saw coming, a leader who doesn't need your respect, only your attention. The old patterns of dignified authority are being completely upended. Power is consolidated not by standing above the spectacle, but by becoming the most outrageous part of it. And you have to ask yourself, in a world where the court jester now wears the crown, how do you even begin to challenge an authority that's already laughing at itself? You turn on the news, you scroll through your feed, and it feels like you're watching the same movie on a loop. On one side, you have the progressive elites, denouncing the rise of extremism. On the other, you have the populist movements, lashing out at what they see as a broken system. It's presented as a simple story of light versus darkness, progress versus regression. But what if this isn't a battle between polar opposites? What if we're looking at two sides of the same tarnished coin? This is an idea from the philosopher Slavoj Žižek that really forces you to look in the mirror. He argues that when the traditional left fails to offer any real, meaningful alternative to the pressures of global capitalism, it creates a vacuum. And politics, like nature, abhors a vacuum. Into that space rushes anti-immigrant populism. Think of the heartfelt liberal who champions multiculturalism. Is it a genuine, deep embrace of others? Or is it sometimes a symptom of the very same fear of others that they see in their opponents, just managed with a different, more polite strategy? Look at movements like Brexit, or the election of Trump. It's easy to paint the voters with a single brushstroke, to label them and move on. But when you dig into the story, you find people caught in a vice grip of two distinct anxieties. Their economic security is gone, and their cultural identity feels threatened. They've been on the losing end of a globalized world, watching jobs disappear while being told their fears are illegitimate. Žižek's point is that this isn't just a random outburst. This kind of populism often rises as the shadow, the direct consequence of a left that ran out of ideas. The working class dislocation in both the US and Britain was expertly channeled into a powerful backlash, not just against immigrants, but against the very elites who failed to provide a better path. It's like watching two characters in a film fight to the death, without realizing they're both trapped in the same rigged game. Branding one side as pure evil misses the deeper, more unsettling truth. The roots of the anger we see don't just spring from hate, they often grow in the soil of liberal capitalism's own shortcomings. See, we're all trained to spot the old-school tyrant. We know the look, the overt oppression, the marching soldiers, the fist in the air. But what happens when the most potent forms of control don't arrive with a threat, but with a clipboard and a concerned smile? What happens when authoritarianism wears the mask of benevolence? This is the terrain where the impulse to control hides behind a facade of expertise, where political correctness and technocratic management become just as suffocating as any old-fashioned cage. It's a system that operates on a quiet, almost paternalistic formula, one that the philosopher Slavoj Žižek nails with his provocative claim that the totalitarian mindset is simply this: I know better than you what you really want. This is the language of the liberal elite, the expert panel that effectively imposes its will by deciding what is acceptable thought, what is proper speech, all under the noble guise of morality and protection. And if you think this is some distant dystopia, just look at the modern town square of ideas, the university campus. Recent efforts to ban speakers deemed offensive or to censor ideas considered controversial have all been wrapped in the language of safety. But when institutions dedicated to tolerance begin to practice a form of ideological policing, critics start to hear an echo from a darker time. It's what drives commentators like Henry Giroux to warn that we are seeing a, quote, more dangerous form of McCarthyism returned with a vengeance. And this is the great challenge. The message here is that you must be vigilant not just against the obvious monster, but against the nice authoritarianism, the one that promises to protect you by unilaterally deciding the very limits of your own mind. Alright, let's just get it out of the way. Someone watching this is probably already recoiling at the very word Slavoj Žižek dares to use: communism. You hear it, and you immediately think of Soviet tanks, bleak concrete high-rises, and the ghost of Stalin. You might be thinking, really? Are we supposed to believe the answer to today's political crisis is a failed ideology from the last century? Isn't that exactly what the new authoritarians want? And that's a completely fair reaction. It's the historical baggage the word carries. But let me ask you a question about that. When the world was teetering on the edge, say, during the 2008 financial meltdown or the absolute peak of the pandemic, what happened to the old rulebook? What happened to all the sacred orthodoxies about governments staying out of the economy and the untouchable power of the free market? Did we stick to them? Or did they, as Žižek points out, just kind of melt into thin air? Think about it. Things that were politically impossible on a Tuesday became urgent government policy by Friday. Trillions of dollars were summoned into existence to save entire industries. Borders slammed shut, and national sovereignties were flexed in ways we hadn't seen in generations. Žižek would argue that in these moments of pure crisis, We got a flash, a brief and frantic glimpse of what he's actually talking about. He isn't trying to resurrect some dusty historical blueprint. He's pointing to the necessity of a global framework, a kind of international solidarity with teeth, capable of stepping in and regulating things when a single nation is powerless. He's talking about a system that can take on challenges that simply laugh at our maps: a warming climate, a viral outbreak, or staggering global inequality. These crises showed us that when the stakes are high enough, we are capable of immense, collective action that overrides old dogmas. The real political question, then, isn't about defending our current form of democracy as if it's a perfect, finished product. The rise of authoritarianism is a symptom that the system is already failing. The challenge is to radically reinvent it, to build an inclusive and proactive global polity, because if we don't, the only alternatives left may be the ones we truly fear. You can feel it, can't you? The sense that the old political machine is sputtering, that the answers we're being given no longer match the questions we're facing. This isn't just a hunch. It's the backdrop to the rise of authoritarian figures who promise simple fixes for overwhelmingly complex problems. See, when it comes to the crisis of our political age, you can spend all your time defending the institutions we have. You can polish the brass on a sinking ship. But that defense will never provide a real alternative to the systemic failure that is currently unfolding. The answer, as the philosopher Slavoj Žižek argues, requires us to pull the emergency brake and consider something far more provocative, what he calls a reimagined, global form of communism. And this is his point. Before you picture a grainy black and white film of military parades, understand that he's talking about something else entirely. He's pointing towards a global framework of solidarity, an international body with the power to regulate economies that serve the few at the expense of the many, or to curb the sovereignty of a single nation when its actions threaten the survival of us all, whether through pandemics or climate catastrophe. It's the kind of cooperation that makes our current global forums look like a high school debate club. By taking this kind of coordinated action, we would stake a claim not just to a set of values, but to a shared future. If that sounds like a science fiction plot, think back to the last global crisis. Think about how, almost overnight, all the unbreakable rules of economics and politics melted into air, as he puts it. Governments enacted massive, world-altering interventions that were unthinkable just a week before. Those moments, however fleeting, offer a glimpse of what is possible. They are the proof of concept for a kind of collective, international action that we're told is impossible. The real choice, then, isn't simply to defend democracy as it is. The challenge is to radically reinvent it, because only a proactive, global solidarity can truly offer a future where authoritarianism becomes an obsolete relic of a less imaginative time.